The Town of Seabrook Island website, all the specifics will be on there.
Okay,
I
thank
will
you.
link up. Thanks for dropping by.
Thank you. There are 57 participants in the conference. Please announce yourself.
This is John Gregg, Mayor of the Town of Seabrook Island. This is the
Debbie, right? Debbie?
This is the conference call for the emergency town council meeting of 1 April 2020 at 2 p.m. We will dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will request I will be requesting momentarily. I will be requesting momentarily, I said. I request that the town clerk confirm that notice of this meeting has been published in compliance with the requirements of the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act.
It has.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, I call the meeting to order. And I have a few opening remarks. First of all, for those on the conference call, I will ask that you mute your phone if you can mute your phone. We will not be able to hear you whether or not you mute your phone. This conference call is being conducted so that you will be able to at least observe by listening this council meeting. If you do not mute your phone, then other people on this call will be able to hear what you say. So you may want to keep that in mind before you speak while on your phone. I believe that it is appropriate at this time for me to indicate the purpose of this meeting, which is to consider approval of a proposed ordinance that is directed to, among other things, undertaking some regulation of short-term rentals within the town and to address other matters in response to the spread of COVID-19 within the country. We have developed the proposed ordinance with consideration given to comments that we have received from members of the community, both comments in favor of undertaking regulation of short-term rentals, as well as comments received that are opposed to regulation of short-term rentals. We have provided a facility for public comment to our website, and I'll ask that Mr. Cronin at this point report what he has in the way of information about the comments that have been received.
Thank you, Mayor. We opened up a public comment portal on our website yesterday, late in the afternoon, for residents and property owners to review and provide public comments. on the ordinance that was advertised for today's agenda. I want to thank everyone for taking the time going in and providing those comments. In total, we received 161 public comments through the website as of shortly after 12 o'clock today, which is when we shut off the public comment period. Of those 161 comments, we received 159 that indicated a preference, whether they were in favor, opposed, unsure, or had no opinion on the draft ordinance. Of those 159, 89 were in favor, 57 were opposed, 12 were unsure, and 1 offered no opinion. I will note that this is not a scientific survey. This is a survey that residents self-selected, went in and participated through our website. Again, 89 in favor, 57 opposed, 1 no opinion, 12 unsure. And we did provide a printout with all of the public comments that came in. I will note there were some people who may have marked that they supported some parts of the ordinance, but not others. So those have all been provided to you in advance of the meeting today. As we put out in the notice of the meeting, because this is an emergency ordinance, there will not be a typical public hearing. So all of the comments were received through the website. And since our website went live, this is by far and away the most comments we've ever received on a pending ordinance, about 3.5 times as many as the second ordinance, which was the dog ordinance last year. So definitely want to take a minute to thank everyone for taking the time to provide us with your feedback and comments. And if members of council have any questions about any of those, please feel free to ask as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm not going to read the ordinance. The ordinance has been provided as being available from the town's website, but I will read from the opening paragraph of the ordinance. An emergency ordinance to adopt the provisions of the mayor's executive orders numbers 2020-01 and 2020-02 to adopt emergency provisions related to certain types of business establishments, to adopt emergency provisions related to short-term rental units, to adopt emergency provisions related to town meetings, to provide for enforcement and penalties of emergency provisions, and other matters related thereto. If you have not already accessed the ordinance from the town's website, I encourage you to do so either while you're engaged in your observance of this meeting or as soon as you can thereafter. I will inform you that by virtue of the way that we're going to approach our consideration of the ordinance, it will be difficult for you to follow our discussions if you do not have a copy of the ordinance before you to refer to. I want to make further remarks concerning the topic of regulation of short-term rentals. I recognize that short-term rentals are, in fact, an exercise of rights of property owners who elect to enjoy that right associated with ownership of their property to receive income from that property. This is not taken lightly. At the same time, council recognizes the concern of our residents, our citizens, that the spread of this disease creates extremely unusual circumstances. And anything that the town can do to try to reduce the spread of the disease and help to prevent the spread of the disease to this town is worthy of consideration. I consider this to be a matter of trying to strike a reasonable balance of the interests of property owners, those who are not undertaking to rent their property and those who are. With that in mind, we will now proceed to consideration of the emergency ordinance. Adoption of the emergency ordinance as it has been presented to members of council.
So,
Is there a second?
Second.
With the motion to approve in a second, we will now open for discussion. And I will say that at this time, anyone who has an amendment to offer to the proposed ordinance as presented may, at this point, make a motion for their amendment.
Mr. Mayor, I have a motion.
Councilwoman Finke, you're recognized for your motion.
So my motion is to amend section 1B. I think the ordinance as drafted doesn't do anything to further the safety of seabrokers. I don't think renters make us any safer or less safe. The bottom line is the only effective way to mitigate transmission and flatten the curve is to religiously follow the personal distancing and hygiene protocols. I know people don't like to hear that over and over, but that's the bottom line. So I am proposing that we amend 1B to take a step further than the governor's order on self-quarantine so that we are imposing a self-quarantine on everyone arriving on the island from outside South Carolina. And I guess we decided the best way for me to do that is just to read that amendment, Mr. Mayor.
You may read your amendment. This is to amend for clarification. This amendment is to amend the provisions of Executive Order number 2020-02.
So the section would then read as follows. The provisions of Executive Order number 2020-02, which was issued by the mayor of the town of Seabrook Island on March 30th, 2020, are hereby adopted by reference as if fully set forth herein. In addition to those areas specified in section 1 and 2 of Executive Order number 2020-02, persons arriving from any location outside the state of South Carolina, whether such persons are residents of such other locations or are residents of the town who are returning from travel to such locations, shall isolate or self-quarantine in accordance with the Governor of South Carolina's Executive Order number 2020-14 by following guidance for isolation and self-quarantine issued by South Carolina DHEC.
Thank you, Councilwoman Finke. Do we have a second of the motion to amend section 1B of the proposed ordinance?
second.
There is a second. So the motion to amend is now open for discussion.
If I could, just to quickly clarify for someone who may not be aware of what's in Executive Order 2020-02, consistent with the governor's executive order, all individuals traveling to Seabrook Island from the states of Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, and the city of New Orleans, I should say, sorry, and those who are traveling from destinations which are listed by CDC as a level 3. Those are primarily areas which have been designated of higher concentrations of community spread of COVID-19. The existing order requires individuals coming from any of those locations to isolate or self-quarantine upon arriving in Seabrook Island for a period of 14 days or for the duration of their stay, whichever is shorter. If the amendment is adopted, that would be amended to say any individual coming to Seabrook Island from any location outside of the state of South Carolina would be required to isolate or self-quarantine for a period of 14 days, or for the duration of their visit, whichever period is shorter.
Thank you. Yes?
My question, Mr. Mayor, would be, is this legal to add on this particular caveat to what the governor has said?
The South Carolina Attorney General issued an opinion on the 28th of March, which was subsequently updated by an opinion issued on I believe it was the 30th of March, to the effect that the South Carolina General Assembly has given the governor preemptive authority with respect to exercise of emergency powers. That preemptive authority means that municipalities or other units, subdivisions of the state government lack authority to exercise emergency powers that would be in conflict with the preemptive authority of the governor. So the question may not be answered perfectly clearly as you posed it, whether or not it's legal. The Attorney General's opinion certainly cast doubt on the authority under the state statutes of municipalities to take actions that are not consistent with the exercise of the authority of the governor.
If I understand you correctly, then, we are, as a town, looking at this and opening ourselves up to possible litigation, I guess?
Well, further, the South Carolina Attorney General expressed the, I guess you could say, gratuitous view that municipalities or other subdivisions of state government that act contrary to the preemptive authority vested in the governor expose themselves to the risk of litigation by private citizens. I will say that that Executive Order 2020-02 was drawn to be in conformance with the governor's order, and it was expressly limited to the same states and city that the governor had addressed in his executive order, as well as including a reference to the CDC Level 3 travel notice countries as having been designated as areas of substantial community spread. So while the governor did not address expressly that travelers from those countries were subject to his order, it was in his order that areas of substantial community spread were the areas or locations of concern of his order.
So, Mr. Mayor, could I ask, even though we're concerned about being inconsistent with the governor's order, we're not being contrary here, we're just being more restrictive with this amendment. Would that be a correct statement? We're not contradicting anything he said, we're just going a step further by being a bit more restrictive on our self-quarantine beyond the high-risk states.
Well, you phrased your question in a way that, yes, we would be more restrictive. The concern, I would say, reading the Attorney General's opinion, is not that we are somehow allowed to be more restrictive under that opinion. It's a concern of who has authority to act.
So,
And the Attorney General's opinion says essentially that the governor's authority is preempted.
so my second question is then, anything we consider, I mean, not just this amendment, which is the motion we're on right now, but as we move forward through this ordinance, we're doing things all the way through that are gonna be inconsistent with the governor.
What you have just said is absolutely correct.
Okay, I just wanna make, it's not just this motion, the whole
It
ordinance,
is not just
not the
this,
entire ordinance, but
it is
big
not
section
just
of
this proposed
Yeah.
amendment that I will say raises that concern. That is a correct and true
Okay.
statement,
thank you,
as I understand it.
thank you.
As to the question of legality, I'm not an attorney,
Okay,
so I'll qualify that, but typically an action of a council or a legislature is presumed valid until a court of competent jurisdiction overturns that decision. So I think at this point, there's been an opinion that's come down from the state attorney general. By that opinion's own admission, it did not include an exhaustive search of particularly issues related to home rule for local governments. But I think at this point, the order would, or anything that you do here today would be presumed valid unless someone were to challenge that decision and a court would rule that what was done was inconsistent either with the Constitution or general statutes of the state.
Well, reading the comments that we received online, there seems to be a significant amount of people who are opposed to this and feel that it is illegal. That's why I am bringing this up, because we have a significant amount of comments here, pretty much threatening a lawsuit. Should the town be sued? Do we have the funds? I know this is completely off track, but I firmly believe that we need to look at this entire picture and not be, as Councilman Finke said, we know how to stop this. We keep social distance, we wash our hands, we wipe down. I am asking, how are we going to financially survive should everyone here on these comment sheets come after us or sue us? Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, certainly
Administrator, I don't know.
that's a risk you take with any action that you take or any action that you choose not to take. I mean, anybody can sue anybody for anything.
Well,
Yes.
I think in this instance, I would not want to rely on the general notion that anyone can sue anyone for anything. If you will allow me not to usurp your view, but I think it's fair to say that you have recognized that there are people who have expressed their position to the town that if we were to take this action, then they would sue. So it isn't just as simple as saying anyone can sue anyone for anything at any time. We are aware of people that feel strongly enough to make comment to the town council. It would be something that they would at least consider acting on to litigate with the town. And I think that goes beyond just the general precept that anyone can sue anyone over anything.
Mr. Mayor, can I make one more comment?
Yes.
I think as we move through this ordinance and we're considering the rental restrictions, I kind of want to go back to the question of this amendment of what we're asking, or we actually say in the language people shall do, is to do the self-quarantine, practice all the protocols, but there's no economic damage to somebody having to do that when they arrive here, versus if we're taking away somebody's ability to rent their property. So if we're just looking at the question of this amendment, we're just looking at personal responsibility. Take this personal responsibility to self-quarantine, make sure you're well, that you're not going to be shedding the virus. And so if we just look at this question, to me, it's not as threatening of somebody suing us as when we get into some of the other issues of this ordinance.
Okay.
Am I kind of,
I understand what you're saying there, but I do feel certainly these comments, there are people who might live down the coast, in the coastal Georgia, who might live somewhere in North Carolina in a county that is not specifically hot at this time. We're sort of going above and beyond what, and we have no way of knowing all that. I realize we have no way of knowing all this. But if I were a property owner and I lived just over the border and I wanted to come and stay in my unit, I would be. And then I was told I had to self-quarantine for 14 days. I don't know. I'm questioning what we're trying to get here.
and also remember too that this isn't like a mandatory quarantine where you're locked up. Self-quarantine is, if you look at CDC or Johns Hopkins practices, it's not that you're going to lock yourself in a room and not see anybody. You can still go outside. I think Skip has done a lot of research on this, that it's not just being inside. It's
Like
isolating
you're encouraged to
yourself.
go outside.
You're actually encouraged.
What you're discouraged from doing
Yeah,
is having a lot of social interaction.
right.
Go walk your dog, but don't walk your dog with your neighbors. Well, go to the beach, but don't get in groups of more than 3 on the beach. Stay away from others.
I would like to point out that the way this amendment is written, it is not just limited to self-quarantine. It is expressly recited that people will isolate or self-quarantine. There are different provisions from CDC concerning what practices are recommended for isolation and the practices that are recommended for self-quarantine. They are different. In Executive Order number 2020-02, we included a notice for the practice of isolation or self-quarantine, and that notice included a recitation of the particular practices that are recommended by the CDC for both isolation and for self-quarantine. They're not the same. So you cannot simply refer to what's being recommended for self-quarantine and end it at that point. If you only wanted to require people to self-quarantine, then I would suggest that you make that express in the amendment that you're proposing.
Mr. Mayor, if I may comment further on that. The difference is in large and a very broad base between isolation and quarantine. Isolation refers to people who have been identified as infected or infectious. Quarantine does not do that. The quarantine protocol recommended by Johns Hopkins involves what we've been saying in a number of our communications so far. Using standard hygiene and washing hands frequently. Don't share things like towels and utensils in your household. Stay at home whenever possible. Don't have visitors. Stay at least 6 feet away from other people in your house. Not just in your household, outside your household, if you go outside. So that's not a very severe protocol to go through, but it can be a very effective one. And both CDC and South Carolina DHEC continue to stress social distance.
Yes, and I agree that we've said that repeatedly. And I would point out that recommended practices for isolation, which, as you had said, the purpose of isolating is to separate people who are sick from those who aren't, and to do that for a period long enough to have a determination of whether or not the person who's being isolated has been recovered from that sickness. So isolation is usually used in connection with a confinement in a medical facility. But that's not the only use for isolation.
We're not changing your executive order. You used both terms in your executive order,
I
correct?
did, and of course, my executive order was consistent by its own terms with the governor's executive order. It did not enlarge what the governor's executive order called for.
And as we know, the governor may surprise us at 4 o'clock this afternoon or 8 o'clock tonight, and he could add Florida or Georgia or Illinois.
This is a true statement, but it isn't the case
But
at
what
the
does-
moment.
Why can't we restrict now a little bit further?
Mr. Mayor, can I offer, is it appropriate for me to offer an amendment to your amendment?
You can have a
Or
second
change.
degree, you can have a second degree amendment, yes.
Okay. What do you want me to do?
Just make a motion that you have an amendment,
I'd like to make a motion to amend
the pending amendment.
Councilman Finke's pending amendment to extend the enhanced positive effects of social distancing applicable to owners, residents, guests, and visitors. In short, anybody. To say that anyone coming to Seabrook Island start a 14-day self-quarantine protocol, as we just described. The date of the protocol will be established as the date of your arrival, and your personal 14-day clock would continue through that window. So if you arrive on Thursday, you've got 14 days of Thursday. If you came the following Friday, you've got 14 days to the following Friday, etc. In addition, anyone already on Seabrook Island, as of, for example, April 4th at midnight, start a 14-day self-quarantine protocol. No exceptions, whether you arrived yesterday or 25 years ago. This is to recognize that no one's immune. In fact, demographics of our community make it an even higher risk area in our age group, my age group. The virus recognizes no political or geographical boundaries. To date, there's no vaccine that will eliminate the virus. And as we said earlier, CDC and South Carolina DHEC continue to stress social distancing as the most effective way to prevent the spread of the virus. So this, in effect, as I tried to state it, would mean anybody, not just people from outside the state of South Carolina. I don't care if they're from Columbia, Mount Pleasant, Greenville, Chicago, Mars. They would have to undergo a 14-day protocol, self-quarantine protocol when they arrive. And if you're already here, start your 14-day protocol. And we'll give an effective date for everybody to do that. That's my proposal.
Is there a second of a motion for amendment of the proposed amendment? Hearing no second, the motion for amendment of the proposed amendment fails. Is there any further discussion of the motion for the proposed amendment of section 1B?
Yes,
Any further discussion?
yes. In support of Councilwoman Finke's amendment, we as local authorities have the best understanding of our citizens. And that out of an abundance of caution, her amendment seems to be reasonable improvement this time that we take that action. That's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Councilman Goldstein. And I will make one comment concerning the text of the proposed amendment. It appears to me that while the text said, shall isolate or self-quarantine in accordance with the Governor of South Carolina's Executive Order number 2020-14 by following guidance for, and then it says, isolation and self-quarantine issued by SCDHEC. I think grammatically that is incorrect, that a person who would be asked to isolate or a person who would be asked to self-quarantine would not be asked to follow the guidance for isolate and self-quarantine.
You want or in?
As appropriate, the appropriate of guidance for isolation and self-quarantine, the appropriate
I think that's
of,
a correct grammatical correction to the amendment.
any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the proposed amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay. The motion is defeated. The amendment will not be made. The next item. Anyone, a motion for another amendment?
Skip, you already covered yours.
I already covered mine.
The next one we had, there was a executive order issued by the governor's office yesterday afternoon related to the operation of so-called non-essential businesses. Up until this point, when the governor had executive orders that were felt to have a direct impact on the town, the mayor had issued an executive order for the town to apply those requirements to the town. With this one just coming out yesterday afternoon, because the ordinance already includes basically putting in ordinance form the mayor's executive order 1 and 2. This would essentially be taking the governor's executive order from yesterday and incorporating it into the ordinance. And basically what it says is, pursuant to the governor's executive order 2020-17, which was issued by the governor yesterday, March 31st, that effective April 1st, today at 5 p.m., the following non-essential businesses, venues, facilities, services, and activities shall be closed to non-employees and shall not be open for access or use by the public. It created a little bit different than what governors elsewhere in the country have been doing, is saying by default, all businesses are shut down except this list of businesses which are deemed essential. Governor McMaster said basically all businesses are considered open except those that he has classified as non-essential. There were 3 different categories. The first one was entertainment venues and facilities as follows. It includes things like, a lot of which we don't have here in Seabrook Island, but they were part of the governor's order, so they're included in the proposed amendment. Nightclubs, bowling alleys, arcades, concert venues, theaters, auditoriums, basically places where you have congregations of people for entertainment type purposes. The second classification was recreational and athletic facilities, which would include fitness and exercise centers, commercial gyms, spas, and public or commercial swimming pools, group exercise facilities, including yoga, I don't know how you say that other one, BARRE, and spin studios or facilities, spectator sports, sports that involve interaction in close proximity to and within less than 6 feet of another person. I know that the club did send a request in yesterday for a determination as to how that may impact some of their facilities. And last I heard that was still pending. Activities that require the use of shared sporting apparatus and equipment, and activities on commercial or public playground equipment. The last group was what were classified as close contact service providers, which would include barbershops, hair salons, waxing salons, threading salons, nail salons and spas, body art, tattoo services, tanning salons, and massage therapy and massage services. We included in here the governor's order does outline a process where individuals and entities, if they're not sure if they're covered or not, then they can follow a process that's outlined in the governor's executive order. So we just included a a paragraph that says if an individual entity is not sure, that they should contact based on the provision outlined in the governor's executive order. And then the governor's order did include a paragraph that said, notwithstanding the foregoing, any and all business venues, facilities, services, and activities are urged to facilitate effective social distancing practices. So basically, even if you are allowed to remain open, and this is not a mandate, it's a urging of the governor to follow these practices, including social distancing, facilitating self-isolation, preventing potential exposure, also encouraging telecommuting and alternate means of purchasing and delivering products. So recommended just taking that section out of the governor's order and including it in the ordinance as well. So we would submit that as a staff recommendation to, for anyone who saw the ordinance that went out yesterday. It had a section, something along the lines of to be included based on the governor's executive order number 2020-17. This is basically implementing the governor's executive order 2020-17. So our staff recommendation would be to include it in this ordinance.
Thank you, Joe. I'll entertain a motion to amend the proposed or draft ordinance to include the recommended provision regarding the governor's order 2020-17. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
The motion having been made and seconded, it is now open for discussion whether or not we will amend the proposed ordinance to include the provision as having been recommended by staff for purposes of including the essence of the governor's executive order 2020-17.
Call the question.
Before we call the question, I would like to comment that I was surprised late yesterday afternoon, that the club had requested clarification from the Department of Commerce as provided in the governor's executive order 2020-17. They had been informed that they could expect a reply within 24 hours, and it was my understanding from Councilwoman Finke that sometime before 2 o'clock this afternoon, she had received communication that the club had been informed by the Department of Commerce that they were not prohibited by the governor's executive order from continuing to operate the amenities of the club. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct, and they got that in writing.
And I think that that is worth note because we have received comments from members of the community to the effect of, why are people still playing golf? Why is the club still open? And I think that is worthy of note that by the governor's executive order, there was at least a potential for that order to have an impact on club operations. The club has undertaken the effort to have clarification as provided by the governor's order, and that clarification has come back to indicate that the club can continue its operations as it has been doing. And with that, Mr. Crane, I think you were asking for a vote on the motion.
Correct.
And I will entertain now to have members of council indicate their approval of the adoption of the motion to amend the proposed ordinance by indicating their approval by signifying aye. Aye. None. Any opposed? The motion to incorporate the provision to the proposed ordinance to reflect the amendment for adopting or following the governor's executive order 2020-17 is approved. We have another motion for amendment of the proposed ordinance. Anyone?
Are we up to the point that you wanted to add dates?
And then section 3A1, 3A3, 3A4 to read as follows: add begin date and end date.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion?
Anybody else want to jump in here?
Can we have a reading, please?
A reading?
Yes, please. Section 3, emergency provisions related to short-term rental units. A, the following requirements shall apply to any dwelling unit or property that is rented or offered for rent to any individual or group of individuals for temporary occupancy for a period not to exceed 28 days, hereafter called short-term rental units. And the first item is no rental guests shall be permitted to check in or otherwise occupy the short-term rental unit between 12:01 a.m. on the date that Councilman Finke was looking for, and on 11:59 p.m. on, again, the date you were looking for.
So the amendment at this point would be to provide a date for section 3A1. The first date is the date for which the prohibition of check-ins would begin.
I'll make a motion, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor, with a couple comments.
Yes.
As we move through section 3 on rental check-ins, I am going to offer amendments to try to improve it, to address several situations on the island and property owners' concerns. I stand with my position that none of this makes us any safer on the island from the spread of the virus. And when all this is said and done, I may vote no on this overall ordinance and get more nasty emails popping up. But so I'm gonna start with this one, our discussion with some dates, and I would suggest start date of April 5th. As we have talked through things with the rental agencies, that people are en route, and if they show up at our gate and they can't check in, we're turning them back away. And I think most people ask for a 2 or 3 day kind of a warning time so they can get in touch with people of don't start down. And that said, there are very few rental guests coming. There have been massive cancellations. The rental inventory is at right now 15% or less. Traffic through the Sepoa Gate is at 70% of this time last year. So there's been a massive reduction there. So I'm going to suggest April 5th for the 30th for a couple reasons. South Carolina DHEC has told us their projection is we're going to hit the height of infection for the Low Country on April 24th. And the president extended out his guidelines to the 30th. So I think if we went to the 30th on these new check-ins and something different happened, if, you know, God forbid, we have a worse situation than DHEC is projecting, it will be, once this ordinance is in place, council can come back and change those deadlines and extend them out. And again, I say this with Councilwoman Fox's concerns in mind that I'm not sure this is the right way to go. It doesn't make us any safer, but apparently from a lot of the comments from people, it will give them some level of comfort that we've done something for renters. So anyway, my motion is to put those dates in as April 5th through April 30th.
Thank you, Councilwoman Finke. I think the way this is written, you are correct that the The first blank is for the start date, so that would be you're proposing that the start date be made April 5th, 2020. The second blank is for the end date, and you are proposing that the end date for this provision would be April 30th, 2020. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you for that. We are going to, at this point, open that for discussion, just those two dates. Are there any comments or questions about those two dates? Any further comments or questions about those two dates? Hearing none. This is, to be clear, this provision, we are not at this point debating whether or not to include the provision about check-ins. We're only addressing the dates of the provision
Yes,
so that we can move on from that.
yes.
I'd like, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make an amendment to her amendment.
Yes?
I would like to change the dates to Friday. April
Excuse
3rd.
me, you are moving to amend the amendment.
Correct.
Thank you. Go
I'd
ahead.
like to make
Please proceed.
the dates April 3rd. My reasoning is that I see no reason to delay the implementation of this ordinance. The President's CDC guidelines, which were issued over 15 days ago, specifically said to avoid discretionary travel. Vacation is a discretionary travel. Approximately 2/3 of the United States citizens right now are under a stay-at-home order. If someone has taken the move to take a vacation here and left under those situations, I feel we have no responsibility to them at this point. I think that we should implement this and take this into the April 3rd date at 12:01 a.m.
Councilman Goldstein, to be sure I am clear on the dates that you are proposing to amend the proposed amendment, pardon me for snickering, is the start date will be April 3rd, 2020,
Correct.
and the end date would be April 30th, 2020?
Correct.
That is your motion.
Yes, it is.
Any discussion, comments, questions of the motion to amend the amendment for dates?
Call the question.
Did you get a second?
Oh, I'm sorry, do we have a second? Excuse me. Is there a second for that?
Second.
There is a second. Okay, any comments, questions,
Call the question.
discussion? All in,
Can I have a question? I have a question.
yes,
So
please.
by Barry saying what he said, we've totally eliminated what Councilman Finke said?
Councilman Finke proposed the start date to be April 5th, 2020. Councilman Goldstein, amendment of the amendment would make the start date April 3rd of 2020. But the end dates proposed by both were the same, April 30th of 2020.
What you would be doing with this motion, this is a motion to substitute his in lieu
Okay.
of Jerry's.
That's what I'm.
So if you approve his motion, then the motion on the table will be April 3rd through April 30th, and then you would vote on that. If his motion fails, then you go back to the original motion, which is April 5th through 30th, and then you would vote on that.
Thank you. That's what I thought it was, and I appreciate you answering that.
Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to amend the proposed amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
No,
The nays have it, 3-2. That amendment to amend the amendment of the proposed ordinance is not passed. We will now vote on the dates as proposed to amend the proposed ordinance for these dates to be start date April 5th, 2020, and end date of April 30th, 2020. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have it. The dates at 3A1 shall be April 5th, 2020. And the last date shall be April 30th, 2020. The next item are the dates at A3. This provision says owners and managers of all short-term rental units within the town are prohibited from accepting new reservations for stays commencing between blank and blank, calling for 2 dates. The start date for which acceptance of new reservations is prohibited and the end date for which acceptance of new reservations is prohibited. May I have a motion for those 2 dates?
I have a motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman Finke. What is your motion?
My motion would be the start date of April 2nd and the end date again of April 30th. So immediately they would have to stop taking reservations.
Okay, so the start date would be at section 3A3. The start date would be April 2nd, 2020, and the end date would be April 30th, 2020. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you for confirming. There is a second. Any questions, comments, or discussion concerning those proposed dates? Hearing none, please signify your approval of those proposed dates by saying aye. Aye. That amendment of the proposed ordinance is approved. Next, we have a proposed amendment for section 3A2.
No,
I'm sorry.
3 and 4.
No, we haven't gone to 2.
Are we gonna go through all the dates?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. We have not covered the dates at 3A4. Excuse me. 3A4 reads, owners, managers, and anyone else involved in the advertising of a short-term rental unit within the town are prohibited from advertising the short-term rental units availability between blank and blank, a start date and an end date. As part of this prohibition, any online booking calendars for such units where provided shall indicate that the unit is not available from blank through blank, again, a start date and an end date.
I make a motion that the dates be consistent with section 3A3, April 2nd to April 30.
Is there a second of that motion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the dates in 3A4 be made to be consistent with the dates as approved for section 3A3. Is there a second? We had a second?
We did.
And is there any discussion, comments, or question concerning those dates? Hearing none. All those in favor of making the dates in section 3A4 in 2 instances consistent with the dates that have been approved for section 3A3, please indicate that approval please signify your approval of those dates by saying aye. Aye. That motion to amend the proposed ordinance passes. Very well. We're making great progress.
Now I think we should, are we on 3A1 as amended with the dates?
No.
Are they ready?
I believe we are now looking at section 3A1 as amended with the specific dates.
You've already amended the dates for
We
3A.
amended the dates, but we didn't accept the provision, did we not?
Well, you've amended it. You won't be voting on the entire thing until the end. At this point, you've
What's the
amended
entire thing?
the entire
Section 3A?
ordinance. The entire ordinance. You don't have to go in and reapprove what's already in there.
Okay.
If you wanted to take it out, somebody could make a motion to strike, but
I
you don't have
understand.
to.
Thank you.
All right, the next proposed amendment is for amending section 3A2. Section 3A2 reads as follows. Rental guests who are currently occupying a short-term rental unit as of the effective date of this ordinance may remain in that unit until the expiration of their existing rental agreement. The existing rental agreement shall not be renewed or extended following the effective date of this ordinance. The proposed amendment of section 3A2 reads as follows. Rental guests who are currently occupying any rental property in the town, including but not limited to short-term rental units as of the effective date of this ordinance, may remain in that unit until the expiration of the existing rental agreement. Existing rental agreements shall not be renewed or extended following the effective date of this ordinance, provided, however, rental guests whose existing agreements commenced on or before March 15th, 2020, and who have continuously occupied that rental unit since March 15th, 2020, may extend their existing rental agreements for additional periods to remain within the unit or enter into a new rental agreement for an alternate rental unit within the town as long as the rental guest occupies the alternate unit on the same date they vacate the original rental unit.
I hesitate to ask for a reading of that.
So, do we have a motion to amend the proposed ordinance in accordance with the amendment as it has been presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions, discussions, comments?
I will make a comment, Mr. Mayor, since this is another one of my amendments. It sounds like a lot of legalese. We are trying to address some fairly specific situations on the island that we don't want to send folks on the road who have been here 2 or 3 months. They may have been in a rental property on a month-to-month basis or 3-month lease, but the owner of that rental property won't extend it any further, or has said, we'll only go week to week because the owner may come down and occupy it. So these people, there are situations where they're snowbirds, some of them very elderly, have been here 3 or 4 months and they can't find another long-term rental. Or the property owner only wants to do a 2-week lease or go week to week. And instead of put them on the road and kick them off the island, they have been here, we're saying it won't be considered a new check-in under the limits of this section. That they can move from that property if they have to another property. They're not leaving the island same day, and it won't be prohibited as a new check-in. That's the intent of this amendment.
Thank you, Councilwoman Finke. I concur in your expression of intent of the amendment, which is to, as you say, protect people who have been here for an extended period of time against being evicted from their continued occupancy of a residence within the town, notwithstanding that their current occupancy may turn out to be subject to the regulation of the short-term rental. Any further comments, questions, or discussion of the proposed amendment for section 3A2? Hearing none. All those in favor of the proposed amendment of section 3A2 of the proposed ordinance, please signify your approval of the proposed amendment by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, the amendment for section 3A2 as presented has been approved. We're moving at breakneck speed. Next, we have a proposed amendment for section 3A5. Section 3A5, and I'm going to backtrack here for a second. Section 3A reads, the following requirements shall apply to any dwelling unit or property that is rented or offered for rent to any individual or group of individuals for temporary occupancy for a period not to exceed 28 days. Hereafter, those are referred to as short-term rental units. So the term short-term rental units is used in association with rentals of 28 days or less. 3A5 reads, the town administrator shall be authorized to grant a reasonable accommodation from the restriction contained herein for any resident who can demonstrate the need for a non-resident caretaker due to illness or disability. The amendment of section 3A5 as proposed reads as follows. The town administrator shall be authorized to grant a reasonable accommodation from the restrictions contained herein in the following circumstances. A, any resident who can demonstrate the need for a non-resident caregiver due to illness or disability. And B, any owner of real property within the town, including members of that property owner's immediate family, who is or occupying a short-term rental unit on a temporary basis during construction of a new home or renovation or repair of an existing home on the owner's property within the town. They have a motion for approval of the amendment of the proposed ordinance.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilwoman Pinkey. Is there a second? Is there a second? Councilwoman Fox, were you seconding?
Second.
Oh, thank you, Councilman Crane, as second. So the motion to approve the amendment of section 3A5 as presented has been made and seconded. Is there any question, comment, or discussion of the amendment for section 3A5 as presented?
Mr. Mayor, I'll comment again.
Yes.
This is one of my proposed amendments, and again, we're trying to address some specific situations. And this one in particular, property owners who own property, who have been renting during construction of a house, and the owner of the rental property is now saying, no, we're not going to go month to month. We're going to go week to week in case we want to come use our property. Those people are building a house. The house isn't done. They're going to get kicked out of the rental. They have nowhere to go, and they're Seabrook Island property owners. So we're trying to give the town administrator some flexibility here to say that's a hardship case. We kick you out of the town of Seabrook Island. Their house isn't done. They have nowhere to go. So this is kind of the circumstances we're trying to get at that exist out there right now.
Thank you for your comment. There were two exceptions that are part of this proposed amendment. The first was a resident who can demonstrate the need for a non-resident caregiver due to illness or disability. And then the second exception was, as Councilwoman Finke has just indicated, to provide relief for people who may be occupying a short-term rental while they are having a house constructed and find themselves out of that short-term rental, should be accepted from being forced out. Any other comments, questions, or discussion of the proposed amendment? Hearing none, please signify your approval of the proposed amendment for section 3A5 as presented by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? Hearing no nays, the amendment for section 3A5 as presented is approved. The next amendment is amendment of section 3A6. Section 3A6 reads as follows. The provisions of this section shall not apply to non-paying members of the property owner's immediate family. For the purpose of this section, the term immediate family shall be defined as a parent, sibling, child by blood, adoption or marriage, spouse, grandparent, or grandchild. The proposed amendment of section 3A6 reads as follows. The provisions of this section shall not apply to members of the property owner's immediate family. For the purpose of this section, the term immediate family shall be defined as a parent, sibling, child by blood, adoption or marriage, spouse, grandparent, or grandchild. Do we have a motion to approve the proposed amendment of the proposed ordinance as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion to amend the proposed ordinance in accordance with the proposed amendment for section 3A6 has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion, comments, or questions concerning the proposed amendment?
Mr. Mayor, I will make a comment. Again, this is one of my amendments, and for people who aren't reading along with this, essentially all we are doing with this amendment is deleting the term non-paying so that it reads apply to members of the property owner's immediate family and deleting the non-paying. It was brought to my attention that some family members are staying in the property and still paying rent to show cash flow and for tax purposes, but for cash flow that helps with the mortgage if that property has a mortgage on it. So that's generally why I propose this amendment.
Thank you, Councilwoman Finke, for your comments. Are there any further comments, questions, or concerns? Hearing none. All those in favor of the proposed amendment for section 3A6 as presented, please signify your approval by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Hearing none opposed, the motion to amend the proposed ordinance in accordance with the proposed amendment for section 3A6 is approved. Pardon me. The next proposed amendment is for section 4A. Section 4A addresses emergency provisions related to town meetings. 4A, section 4A reads as follows. All meetings of the town council, Ways and Means Committee, Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, Development Standard Ordinance Advisory Committee, Public Safety Committee, and Utility Commission are hereby canceled through a date to be determined. Special or emergency meetings may be called on an as-needed basis and may be conducted by a teleconference as provided in subsection B below. So what we need here is the dates.
Dates or date?
Excuse me?
Dates or date. The way it reads, it's looking for just a date and end date.
No, hereby canceled through a start date and then, yes. From, if the start date would be effective with the amendment, I believe, wouldn't it, Joe?
Aren't they already canceled?
The meetings that have been canceled, so.
Yeah, you voted in the past to cancel the meetings through April 30th, so I would recommend that we just put that in the ordinance. If you want to modify that day, you can have a different date here.
The real question is, our amendment calls for 2 dates, but in fact, we only need 1 date.
Yes, I believe that's right. Yeah, just an end date.
Yes, one day. Very good, thank you, Mr. Crane. And so,
I'd like to offer an amendment that that date be May 31.
Can we readdress this?
I'm sorry,
If we put April 30th, can we readdress it during April if necessary?
Or can you explain, Skip, why you
Why
want to
you
go out
want it
to
to be-
May 31?
for just the opposite reason that no, why did we make it, and then we can change it and bring it in if we have to. Otherwise, we don't have to keep pushing it out and pushing it out. I don't think it really makes any difference. I just threw it out on the table as a date. I want to make it April 30th, fine.
I don't know, I'm just asking.
The farther out I thought, the better, but I thought June 30 was too far. A little bit
well,
too pessimistic.
We're like,
so we have,
I'd like that myself.
may I say, if I may say, it has been moved, I believe, is what you were doing, moving
I think that's what it's supposed to
to make the date for section 4A May 31st, 2020. Is that correct?
be. Correct.
So it has been moved. Is there a second? Hearing none. That motion is defeated. Is there another motion for the date for section 4A? Anyone? Anyone? Hearing no one, I will move that the date for section 4A be made April 30th. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the date for section 4A be made April 30th, 2020. Is there any comment, question, or discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of making the date for section 4A April 30th, 2020, please signify by saying aye. Aye. That amendment is approved, so the date at section 4A shall be April 30th, 2020. The next amendment is to add a new section 5 to read as follows and renumber all remaining sections. Section 5, emergency provisions related to temporary use permits. 5A, all temporary use permits for events and activities taking place between the effective date of this ordinance and an end date to be specified are hereby repealed. The zoning administrator shall not issue any new temporary use permits for events and activities taking place between the effective date of this ordinance and an end date to be specified by the amendment. Do I have a motion to amend the proposed ordinance to add a new section 5 as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to amend the proposed ordinance to add a new section 5. And at this point, as for purposes of discussion, I would entertain that there be a comment to set what the end date would be, if you would please.
This is one that I'd recommended, knowing that all meetings of the town have been canceled through the end of April. There's certain temporary use permits that have to go through Planning Commission and Council. So if Planning Commission wouldn't be meeting until sometime in early to mid-May, I would recommend that date be set probably either May 15th or somewhere thereabouts, possibly even later.
Any discussion of what the date should be made?
Just a question to Joe, not knowing how these various committees particularly have to approve things, would they even be able to meet at the beginning of May to meet the 15th deadline?
Well, as of right now, the way the ordinance stands, we would say the May meeting is scheduled to take place
Okay,
unless council votes to move that date
again,
from April 30th, which is what was just approved in the last motion. So as of right now, anything that were to come in would be held until, if it was after that date, it would be held, and then planning commission, if it was required, planning commission would take it up, and then it would have to go to council. There's certain temporary use permits that I, as zoning administrator, have the authority to approve administratively. So if they're, I think it's either up to 72 hours or 72 hours and under, I can do those without having to go through planning commission and council. But right now, without some type of moratorium in place or something, I have no basis to not issue the permit. So that was why I've requested this be included. This isn't necessarily saying that every event or every activity has to be canceled. This is only events and activities that would come to the town for a temporary use permit under our zoning requirements. That basically, if we had already issued it, then that permit would be repealed, which I believe the only one we have right now has been the Dolphin Slam at Bohicket Marina for April, which would be within that time frame. We have one pending, which had gone to Planning Commission and was pending for the March Town Council meeting, which was subsequently canceled. That was the Billfish tournament at the marina. As it stands right now, that could still come before council and you could approve it and allow it to happen the first week of May. But if you wanted to set that date sometime in May, they would have to likely either cancel that event or find an alternate date for the event. I did hear from the marina manager yesterday or 2 days ago, and I think they're just looking for some type of definitive answer from the town. And as we stand right now, I can't give them an answer because I don't know if that event would be allowed to take place or not. So whether it's April 30th, sometime in May, end of May, whatever, that's completely a policy decision. But I would like to have something definitive so we can tell people when they're asking if we're still
I guess
taking permit.
My question is on, if we use May 15th, we would be able to hit that time frame if somebody did put it in. I mean, I don't, we would, if we started meeting again.
Assuming you started meeting again May 1st, council, if it's something that had to go before council,
Yeah.
council wouldn't meet until the end of May,
That's what I'm saying.
unless you had a special called meeting to take up that one item. But yeah, planning commission meets the second week of the month, and council would be the fourth week of the month.
Yeah, so it's, yeah. It almost seems like it could be an impossibility to have this approved before June 1st. Well, so I just want a realistic date rather than a date that's out there that we probably can't even meet. Unless we can approve it in Ways and Means.
You typically only vote on matters at the regular town council meeting. And if it was something that had to go to planning commission, council, Ways and Means would be the day before the planning commission meeting. So you wouldn't even have the
We
planning.
wouldn't have it.
You wouldn't have the planning commission's recommendation at that point. So, I mean, if you used maybe I would say maybe the end of May.
Yes.
You could use the day after the council meeing, but then somebody's doing all their planning and not knowing if it's going to be approved until
Exactly.
the day before the event or not. I would, if I was going to throw something out, I would probably say the end of May 31st.
May 31st, just, yeah, that's my trying to get you there, thinking that it's an impossible, May 15th is sort of an impossible comment.
Any further comments, questions, or discussion? At this point, I think I will call for approval of the new section 5 as presented, with the date being set in two places as the end date of May 31st. I will read it again. Section 5, emergency provisions related to temporary use permits. All temporary use permits for events and activities taking place between the effective date of this ordinance and May 31st, 2020 are hereby repealed. The zoning administrator shall issue any new temporary use permits, shall not issue any new temporary use permits for events and activities taking place between the effective date of this ordinance and May 31st, 2020. If, may I have, I think we've been through the motion, second discussion, so at this point, please signify your approval of the amendment, I will call it, of the proposed ordinance to add a new section 5 by signifying your approval by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. Hearing none, this amendment of the proposed ordinance is approved with an end date of May 31st, 2020. And that, so far as I know it at the moment, we have no further amendments for consideration of the proposed ordinance. Joe, are you aware of any other amendments?
Not at this time. There was one, I was reading the Mount Pleasant ordinance that were, I guess this was a proclamation, not an ordinance, that came out of Mount Pleasant yesterday. It did reference the effect that future executive orders of the governor may have on their activities in Mount Pleasant. That may be a provision we want to include somewhere in the ordinance, that if there's an order that comes out from the governor that supersedes or modifies any changes, would that take automatic precedence over our requirements? Or would you want that to have to come back and amend our ordinance?
Doesn't it do that by definition?
Well, technically, your ordinance would still be on the books. If you didn't have a supremacy clause in the ordinance, to amend it, you'd have to go back and amend the ordinance. I mean, ultimately, the net effect is his order would take precedence, but our ordinance would be in conflict with his order.
We certainly have enough to do without all of a sudden being at the whim of the governor with every time he or she decides to do something different. I understand your point, though.
Joe, I'd say this, from my perspective, not having the benefit of having seen the thing that you're referring to, I am reluctant to undertake to amend this ordinance further to address what you've seen from Mount Pleasant. Should the governor issue another executive order that has an impact on this ordinance, should it be adopted, then at this point, I feel that we would have to respond to the governor's executive order at that time as appropriate. That being said, we have been to the point of having a motion to approve the ordinance, seconded, having had discussion, having had motions to amend the ordinance, having had those amendments of the ordinance approved or rejected as we just went through. I am now ready to call for a vote for approval.
So you can call for a vote. I just wanted to say before you actually vote, as an emergency ordinance, it does require a 2/3 vote in the affirmative for the ordinance to pass and take effect immediately. By law, it can be in effect for, it would automatically expire on the 61st day following its effective date. We do have that included in here. I just wanted to state it for anyone who was not aware that the ordinance would automatically expire, and any provisions that don't have a sunset provision of an earlier date, the ordinance itself would expire 61 days from today. And for to meet the supermajority, you would have to have 4 out of 5 members voting in favor of the ordinance.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, the ordinance does say expressly, it's section 9, the effective date. This emergency ordinance shall be effective immediately upon enactment and shall expire automatically on the 61st day following the date of enactment.
So Joe, even though we don't have any amendments pending, can we still make comments?
I mean, you haven't taken a vote on the ordinance as amended, so
The question hasn't been
I
called.
think you can have additional amendments offered or
Yes,
questions and
we
comments.
can have additional questions and comments. Yes. Jerry,
I
gathered
know
that you
that
have
I'm
a
just
comment.
like dying to say something, not really. This
Okay.
is a really, really tough vote for me because I don't think the rental restrictions make us any safer
They don't.
and open us to litigation. I've said that over and over
We're
again.
not addressing the real issue.
Exactly.
We're
We
imposing
need
financial
to-
hardship on some without addressing the real issue.
Right, we need to go back to the only effective way are those protocols. I also want to say, because I'm watching emails come in as we're having this discussion of people saying, we're going to have this huge explosion of rentals. So I just want to go on record that council, I've been the point person, council has been in contact with all our major rental agencies. They have seen no uptick in rentals. They have seen nothing but massive cancellations. On Monday, one agency had 17 cancellations. There are not that many new renters, like 4 or 5 coming through the gate this weekend. Most all of them are owners coming through the gate. When you see cars that have out-of-state license plates, I so appreciate the person that has been so diligent to send me pictures of all those out-of-state license plates. They don't mean anything other than you take great pictures with your cell phone, because lots of our non-resident owners, property owners on the island that have every right to be here, do not have South Carolina license plates. So I just want folks to know, we're not making this in a void of not looking at pros and cons on both sides, of not trying to get every statistic and number we can on rentals, but mostly looking over and over again at the medical science that there's one way to mitigate transmission. So that said, Mr. Mayor, I'm done.
Thank you for your comment, Councilwoman Finke. I think that we have emphasized repeatedly through our public information statements that there is one recognized measure that is recognized as being effective to prevent the spread of this disease, and that is social distancing. This is a disease that is spread through contact. Social distancing overcomes contact. These measures that are contained in this ordinance does not relieve anyone in any way, shape, or form from their responsibility to undertake social distancing. My recognition, I think I had started early on in this meeting, of the impact of this ordinance is affecting property owners who are entitled to enjoy the rights that come with ownership of the property to receive rents. There are property owners here who have chosen not to use that right of their property, and those property owners have been heard from. At this point, I think we have tried to strike a balance. I recognize that under the current circumstances, with the town having not restricted access to the beach, other than the access restriction that is already in place by virtue of having private beach accesses, we have what you could refer to as a beach available to those who come here And we are a standout in the context of the coastal communities that have undertaken to regulate short-term rentals. So the concern is that we may be positioning ourselves as being more attractive to people to come here. And I think that is doing a disservice to our residents. That is all I have to say on the subject. Anyone else can offer any comment they prefer.
A comment.
Yes,
So yes, social distancing is the most effective, in addition with hand washing and everything else. We have one issue on the island that is a pinch point, which is Harris Teeter. So by saying that excluding renters from the island will not affect social distancing, I think that is incorrect. If renters come to the island, given there are no restaurants open or you have takeout, that Harris Teeter is a pinch point, and more people that go to Harris Teeter increases the density, which is going to cause social distancing become less effective. In addition, we still have not answered the question of that the CDC and the president and the White House have said that discretionary travel is to be avoided. And what part of the vacation is not discretionary travel? We still keep dancing around that question, but that is the definition of discretionary travel is a vacation. So it is somewhat irresponsible to sit here and say that, well, we don't want to infringe upon someone else's rights when the President of the United States and the CDC have specifically said discretionary travel is to be avoided. 2/3 of this country right now is in a stay-at-home order. And we sit here and we debate about renters. This seems somewhat ironic. We sit here and debate about a self-quarantining, which seems reasonable, yet we're still going to say, well, even if it's just a few, I understand. If it's just a few, then we're not going to affect very many, then it seems illogical not to approve the amendment. But at this point, it just seems that we are talking on one side about quarantining and on another side, take a vacation. This doesn't make sense.
I just want to comment that we can't, I'm searching for the word. Property owners coming here may be their decision to sit out this crisis at their property, and they don't consider it a vacation. So just assuming everybody coming to the island is coming with discretionary travel on vacation, maybe they're coming here to be with family, to sit out this healthcare crisis. I don't think we should be determining what the reason is why these property owners are coming to the island.
Correct, and we have not subjugated the property owner to any restrictions at all. We have not discussed property owners or non-resident property owners at all. All we are talking about are people that are so-called vacationers, those coming here that are intending to pay for a rental unit. We have not ever discussed property owners. So those are the people we're affecting. And I still, again, we sat and we pushed the date to allow people to come in this Saturday, when the order right now from the President of the United States is avoid discretionary travel. If they left and we feel like we're going to impose some type of hardship on them because they left today to come here, well, they should never have left in the first place. That is not our responsibility. They should not be traveling on vacation at this time of what the president calls a war, with 2/3 of the countries at stay-at-home orders, where hotspots are popping up all over the place, where the state of South Carolina predicts 8,000 infections by the time this is done, where the CDC, DHEC right now tells us that we should expect a 25% infection rate, where we have a population on this island of over 67 years old, where the death rate on the population of this island shall be somewhere on the order of 5 to 10%. Given all those numbers, an abundance of caution should be used by this council. And we should not sit here and say, well, we don't want to infringe upon a renter, a vacationer who is going to leave today. We don't want to make them turn around because they may have Uncle Billy's house. We should be looking at doing all we can to provide safety and security for our citizens.
thank you for your comment. Any further comments?
Question?
Yes.
We sort of skipped over the enforcement and penalties, and I just want to ask this question because I know we have, a code enforcement officers too. I'm just curious, and I'm going to ask this of both you and Joe, how is this being enforced if passed? How do we enforce this?
The ordinance provides that violation of the ordinance are punishable in accordance with the provisions of sections 17 and 227 of the town code. So we have the ability to issue citations, and if a person is found to be in violation, they're subject to fine. In fact, the town code provides that they would be subject to imprisonment, but as I'm sure you're aware, the town does not have a jail. So imprisoning someone is not a feasible exercise of enforcement by the town of Seabrook Island at this time. The fact that we established that there are provisions for violation, we also stated in the proposed ordinance that the code enforcement officers, we have 2 part-time code enforcement officers, are authorized to enforce the ordinance. So we've set out certain restrictions on conduct. And to the extent that a code enforcement officer can determine that there is a violation of a restriction on conduct, then they can enforce the ordinance by issuing a citation, which would then subject that person to making an appearance at the municipal court and be adjudicated whether they are found to have violated the ordinance or found not to have violated the ordinance.
So my question would be, how do they know that this unit, short-term rental unit, is being occupied by someone in its family or someone who owns it? I'm just curious as how that would work.
Kind of put a lot of it back on the management companies because they're the ones that would be penalized, right, Joe? If
Yeah,
they advertise it or rent it or allow the check-in.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, obviously, we don't control the security gate.
That's correct.
That's the big outstanding issue. Now, assuming this passes today, probably my first email when we leave will be sending a copy of the final version to the president of the POA and the director of the POA, just so they're aware what's in place. Our hope is that while you can't compel them to enforce our ordinance, they will know what the ordinance requires, and to the extent they can assist with the enforcement. The ordinance will also be sent to all of the rental property managers. And there is a provision in here that I think is very important, that if you are found to violate the ordinance, not only can you be fined for violating the ordinance, you can also have your business license suspended or revoked. So if there is a company that we find, whether through complaint, notification, the tools that we have at our disposal, if we find that it is in violation, not only can the individual renting that unit be subject to a potential fine, or an ordinance summons, I should say, but the owner of that unit can be subject to a fine and potentially revocation or suspension of their ability to license that unit. And a management company, if any, can also be fined and potentially lose their ability to operate in the town, not just managing that unit, but operate in the town entirely. So I think enough of it. the possibility of the penalties. Our hope is that we will see the voluntary compliance across the board, but we will have tools at our disposal, and we'll be requesting some help if at all possible. And we have gotten some help. I don't want to say that, we're getting roadblocks or anything. A couple days ago, after the governor's executive order went out requiring mandatory isolation or quarantine for people coming from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, New Orleans, we had prepared a flyer, and the director of the POA did allow us to bring copies of that flyer to the gate, and they agreed to help distribute those flyers. So, they so far have been assisting us with that and have been providing additional information from the POA to individuals coming to the island. But we're not going to be out going and knocking on people's doors at the middle of the night, asking to see, birth certificates. Are you actually related to this person or not? But there will be tools that we will have at our disposal to assist with the enforcement.
And in that regard, I'll just share that my conversation with Mayor Weaver of Keel Island, I asked him about how, about cooperation between the Keel Island Community Association, KICA, which operates their security gate, with enforcement of their ordinance. And he informed me that they had found that they could work with their, I guess you would call it, access pass software to be able to deal with those arrivals who have an access pass. So they have the ability to, if someone came in with a pass that should have been revoked, they can deal with that at the gate. And I have suggested to the president of the POA that to get any further information from beyond what I knew about what the KICA security team was doing, they should contact KICA security. I don't know that our people use the same gate access software that they use.
The most effective way would be to have a checkpoint the same way Isle of Palms, Sullivan's Island, I believe, Folly Beach, Edisto, and there's actually a police checkpoint that you have to go through in verification. All of those jurisdictions have a police department. We do not have a police department. And the mayor had shared some information from a couple days ago that, an inquiry was made to the sheriff's department that if the town were to set up some sort of checkpoint or limitation on access to the town, because you got to remember, the town and what's behind the gate are not coterminous. There's property outside the gate that is in the town. And the response that the mayor received back from the sheriff's department was that they would not enforce a municipal checkpoint absent a declaration of martial law from the governor. So not having a police department, having the sheriff's department telling us that they would not do it absent a declaration of martial law, we really don't have a viable option to have a municipal checkpoint on your way onto the island.
I'm familiar with that, and it brings up something in what is now Section 6A, which says law enforcement officers of the state of South Carolina are also, with cooperation from them, and in as much as we've already been told that they will set up a checkpoint, would they in any way, shape, or form help us enforce this outside the gate? Yeah,
there are certain things from the governor's orders which direct state law enforcement and local county sheriff and municipal police departments to enforce. So, for example, under the governor's executive order, any law enforcement officer in the state has the ability to disperse groups of 3 and to require no groups of 10 or more. If there are groups out on our beach, for example, the mayor mentioned we have 2 code enforcement officers. We have already activated our beach patrol, and I think we have 10 that we've sworn in so far who are also code enforcement officers. So under the mayor's executive order, they have some authority to disperse groups. If they run into issues, they can also work with and be in contact with the sheriff's department if they do need to come out and perhaps perform a custodial arrest. Code enforcement officer does not have the authority to perform a custodial arrest, where a law enforcement officer does. So if they run into an issue, they can work with a law enforcement officer from the sheriff's department to assist in facilitating the enforcement, whether it's a local executive order or a statewide executive order.
But it would
They're also there to assist.
But it would have nothing to do with the short-term rental portion of this in any way, shape, or form.
Not per se. The provisions of this ordinance that essentially adopt the prior executive order, and in particular, the executive order that addresses gatherings, our executive order prohibits gatherings of more than 10 and requires that gatherings of 10 or fewer practice social distancing, but it also recognizes that in accordance with the governor's executive order, the state law enforcement officers have the authority, which they had before the governor's executive order, to disperse crowds when they deem that it is appropriate to do so, because a crowd of 3 or more poses a threat to public health. So the idea that there will be sheriffs on our beach dispersing crowds of 3 or more is, let's say, a possibility and what I would describe as not likely. However, the ordinance, the executive order, contemplated that it would be possible, and to the extent that our code enforcement officers, whether they be the code enforcement officers that work part-time or the beach patrol who are code enforcement officers, would cooperate with state law enforcement in that circumstance.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
since we're talking about penalties, I did have one more comment. And I wanted to say because so much of the onus is on the management companies on these rental restrictions and the threat of the penalties. One of the reasons I proposed the April 5th date was not to inconvenience a traveler, but more the input from those rental agencies saying, we need time to take down ads, make phone calls, cancel reservations before we're penalized for not having these things in place. So it wasn't just I was inconveniencing a traveler. I'm looking at these rental agencies who I think every single one of them live on Seabrook, small operation. Please give us some lead time before this is on top of this. So I wanted to say that's why I picked April 5th.
Thank you. Clearly, there's no point in setting up violations that achieve at least a technical violation of an ordinance against someone who is endeavoring to comply, and they have a reality to deal with. And I totally support the dates that you had nominated for the effectiveness of the hiatus and taking reservations. Any other questions or comments? There being none, we will now call for a vote. All those in favor of the ordinance as amended, please signify your approval by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? I heard no opposed, so I'll assume, since I heard no opposed, that was a unanimous vote for approval. The ordinance is approved. With that,
Before you adjourn, can I at least just say some positive news?
yes.
The path is back open. They completed the paving. There's one little section, the crosswalk going from the pathway across to the marina. They were going to try to get the concrete contractor in today to pour that. Haven't been out there in a few hours, so I don't know if they have or not. But the pathway itself is back open from Town Hall to Fresh Fields. So you can use it, just make sure you're social distancing and not using it in groups of more than 10 people.
Thank you, Joe, and I want to express my thanks to all members of council for all the work that they put in to finally move this forward and have it approved. I think it's important that we do this step at this time under these circumstances. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Meeting is adjourned.